Hello, students. Welcome to what may not seem like a very exciting topic, but I brought on a special guest. Sandy Kasahara is here to talk to us more about the Code of Ethics for Internal Auditors. So the IIA, the Institute of Internal Auditors Code of Ethics. I'll talk a little bit about the definitions, but she's going to bring them to life for us. So we are going to make what seems like a very boring conversation really fun. So Sandy, I am going to start how I've been doing all these interviews for the students with, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself so they can get to know you, your education, career background, what you've done, and just a fun fact so they can get to know you a little better.
Sure. So I am a Colorado native, as is my husband, which is rare. Grew up in Colorado, went to University of Denver and got my bachelor's and master's way back in the previous millennium. In a 5-year program, loved it. Started out in public accounting, as a lot of people do, in Big Four for 5 years. And then eventually led 3 different internal audit teams in 3 different industries. And for the past several years, I've been doing contract work for a couple of good-sized clients. So a very typical path, I guess, for an auditor, and have enjoyed it over the decades. One fun fact is I took my first internal audit job just because I was interested in the company and thought it would be a quick stepping stone, and I would just be there for only as long as necessary to get my next job in the company. And here, 30 years later, I'm still an internal auditor because it turns out it's a great place to be and a well-kept secret, very unique opportunity. So it turns out I loved it.
That's awesome. Well, I love that you said it's a well-kept secret, except that my goal in life, as you know, is to make it not a well-kept secret anymore. So
Fair enough.
we're going to try to convince these students how fantastic a career in audit is and how fantastic auditors are. So
Absolutely.
and one reason I think auditors are a genuine breed of humans is because I think we have the highest standards out there, some of the highest standards out there. And part of that is that we have our own code of ethics. And I just want to talk to you, give me your idea on why is it important in any profession, let alone internal audit, to have a code of ethics? And yeah, just your thoughts on that.
So it's so important to me that on each of the teams that I led, everybody on the team was required to read and sign the IIA Code of Ethics every single year. And I don't know that other people do that, but I found that when we read it again and you refresh yourself on the contents of it, all of a sudden these situations I had been dealing with, or I know team members had been dealing with, or the team as a whole, I would just view through a different light. It kind of helped put some boundaries on things. It helped me to have courage in situations where kind of difficult conversations needed to be held. I think it's really valuable. In my mind, a code of ethics keeps the honest people honest and makes the dishonest people very uncomfortable.
I love that. That's
To the
great.
point where on one of my public accounting clients, there was a guy who was just shooting the lights out. I mean, super successful. The firm just loved him. When he walked into the room, everybody, he was like a, a an NFL superstar or something. And one year he refused to sign his conflict of interest disclosure, which was part of their code of ethics. And of course, it was the end of his career, but it turned out he had been doing all kinds of inside and backdoor deals in order to build that success. And so immediately, the balloon was deflated, and that was that. So is code of ethics a big deal? I think it's a pretty big deal.
Absolutely. And I think, it's the substance of what a code of ethics is versus the form of it. But unfortunately, we all have to learn the form and the words. And so that's what we're going to do now, is go through the principles in the code of ethics. Now, I've mentioned this in previous videos for the students that the IIA standards are actually in the process of maybe changing, and it might not be for a little while. Right now we have 4 principles in our code of ethics, but the standards proposal is 5. So we're actually going to kind of just briefly go through all 5. I'm going to define it at a very high level, and then we're just going to talk about why is this particular principle important. So the first one is demonstrating integrity. And really, the high level definition is internal audits demonstrate integrity in their work and behavior. But the new standards, Sandy and I were actually just talking about this, include honesty and courage as one of kind of the sub bullets of integrity. And then it goes into organizational ethical expectations and legal and professional behavior and expectations and integrity. And so, really, to me, integrity is doing the right thing. What is integrity to you, Sandy, in the real world of auditing?
Integrity, if you are not perceived as having high integrity, you really have no credibility. And our role in the organization is to make recommendations, to influence people, and if you are not perceived as being credible, nobody's going to listen to all those recommendations. Like, you can do as much testing as you'd like, but at the end of the day, if nobody hears you, it's all for naught. And integrity and credibility take a long time to earn and can be gone in an instant.
That's so
So
right.
it is important, the honesty, the it's not only what you're doing at work. I mean, if you bash your company on social media, how credible are you at work? Or if you find yourself in prison, like, they're probably not going to listen to an internal auditor from prison, right? So we do need to have the highest standards for ourselves. Part of our role is to make sure that policies of the organization are adequate. Those policies set the tone for integrity for the organization. The procedures that really bring those policies to life, we spend a big chunk of our time looking to see if people are carrying out those procedures as intended. Well, if we're going to judge everybody else in terms of how they're doing on that, we certainly need to then uphold those standards at the highest level for ourselves as well.
Absolutely. And something you said right off the bat reminded me of the, trust equals sales, sales equals trust. So it's like,
Mhm.
it's like that circle. And so, I do think that's a lot of it is having that integrity. Like you said, we're selling our recommendations, really. I
Yep,
always used to ask auditors how comfortable they were as salespeople, and it made them really nervous. But that's a lot of what we're doing.
it's true.
And the best salespeople out there have the utmost integrity. So
Yes.
agree with that. All right, now the next one is all about how we maintain objectivity. So that's the second principle. Individual objectivity is kind of the first section, and really safeguarding objectivity overall is the second piece. And then disclosing impairments to objectivity is the third piece of this standard that they have in the proposed new standards. So, to me, objectivity is lack of, not having bias,
Mhm.
and the definition, let's see, the formal definition is, let's go back here to the top. Internal auditors maintain an impartial and unbiased attitude when performing internal audit services and making decisions. So define or kind of translate that to us to real world again.
And objectivity is the sweet spot, right, of internal audit, because we get to do work all over the organization. We have a much broader view than most people who are in operational areas that we're working with. They know deeper their area, but also that depth of their understanding leads to natural bias, right? So they say that's the way we've always done it, or, well, why would you do this instead of that? Well, when I was trained or whatever, like, they have a natural bias that's not all bad, but anybody responsible for the function is biased. If they're running it, they're going to say this is the best that it could be. Obviously, you want to do things well in your organization. So us coming in from the outside, we don't have responsibility for this function on a go forward basis. We haven't made the decisions to get it to where it is. Brings us in with an unbiased and objective approach, which is what the board really expects us to do. It's different from everybody else they're hearing from in the board meetings. They know that we don't have a dog in the hunt, so to speak. We're bringing them just kind of a clear and unbiased view. We have had instances, there are different reasons why you might need to look at objectivity closer. So if your next door neighbor is in charge of the area that you're going to audit,
Mhm.
it's at least worth bringing it up, right? So that disclosure piece, shining some light on it and walking through, is this a problem or is it not? You may never speak to your next door neighbor in a city, I don't know. Or you
Right.
may have dinner with them every other night. Well, those are two totally different things. It's not a good idea to be having an affair with a leader in the area that you audit often, which that actually did happen to me. I found out in a very bad way. But one of my lieutenants was having an affair with someone in this area that she was supposed to be auditing all the time. Um, so those sorts of things, again, it kind of refers back to that credibility and integrity. If people find out, well, wait a minute, this is like one of your closest friends that you're supposedly giving us subjective information about. It
Mhm.
doesn't look right. So it
Yep.
is importantly the appearance of objectivity in addition to kind of your own conclusion as to whether it's objective, which is why that disclosure piece, well, let's look at it and have several people weigh in before we decide. And it's not the end of the world. A lot of times you have those sorts of situations where that impairment is discussed and it's fine. You can just kind of carry on. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't be hesitant to it's better to discuss it and turn out fine than to not discuss it and later have people go, "Oh my gosh, like this never should have happened."
It's the transparency that needs to be
Transparency.
there. And I actually had someone come up to me after a training and said, I've audited my sister. Like it was small town, small bank, and it you could tell she was just nervous, about it. And like, and she said, I went to my chief audit exec and they were like, oh, don't worry, we trust you. And it is kind of one of those like, she didn't want to push back on her boss. And I said, like, if you're uncomfortable with this, like you said, the appearance of bias, it's your sister.
Mhm.
You need to speak up. And, one thing we kind of glossed over was that honesty and courage under integrity. None of objectivity, integrity are great, but they're really great unless you have the courage to stand up, for
Yes.
them. So I told her, use the code of ethics and just I appreciate your trust, but I don't, and the appearance of this is just bad and it's against our code of ethics. And so that was one of those difficult conversations that I had to coach through. So
And it's not all or nothing, like, she could have said, "If you want me to continue to do the work, can we put an extra layer of review on it? Or can we" there are ways to manage it. So
yes,
sometimes you can kinda do a meet in the middle thing too, but that
yeah,
was an unfortunate response from her CAE. I'm disappointed.
right. Yeah, I know. It's just it is hard and it's one of those like, oh, what do you do when your boss says it's okay or tells you to do something and
Yep.
that's when I think these code of ethics really are important for all levels of auditors to understand that
Yeah.
they're there. And I love that you as a CAE had your auditor sign off on it. That is unique, though. That's great. The next principle is demonstrate competency, which you would think would be inherent, right? You would want to be competent in the work that you're doing, but sadly, this is here for a reason, and we want to make sure everybody has the right audit skills, knowledge, skills, and abilities to fulfill their responsibilities as an auditor. Any thoughts, instance where this comes to play in my mind is IT,
Yep.
finding the right like IT auditors or cybersecurity auditors, that's difficult right now. And I think organizations are getting better at, well, we might need to co-source or outsource. You and I both have done consulting for that very reason. And I think, that goes along with this principle a lot. They're recognizing we need to fill that knowledge gap.
Mhm. And that's a really good example where I think that outsourcing or co-sourcing is common, is a technical area or a specialized tool set that wouldn't make sense for my organization to buy, but that a service provider has and can run. The thing is that we in many of the areas we go into audit, we know nothing going in and we learn as we go. And so we get to the point where we feel like, well, I don't know, but I'll learn. I'll get there and we can become proficient at anything. Well, not entirely, right? So where's the line where it's appropriate to apply what you already know in this area that you don't know versus I just don't have the skills to do it. In Colorado, we refer to it as being out over your skis. You
Yeah.
got to be able you've got to be able to tell I'm in control. I have what I need in order to produce, the quality of result that the board expects and the company deserves or and those conversations take courage too, right? Because you're asking for either more money so you can hire somebody to do it, or this audit that needs to be done isn't gonna get done because I just don't have, the expertise myself. Well, that is a very difficult conversation, and in those small organizations, like you talked about the small bank in a small town,
Mhm.
those are not always easy answers. But again, as you pointed out, that's when you get back out the code and you say, this is one of my professional standards, and this is where I sit.
Yes, it's got to be the backbone, almost. I see that. And one thing you mentioned, one of the substandards for this principle is the continuing professional development that we have to do. And I think that goes to what you're saying of there are some things that we can learn. And I think knowing the difference between I can learn how to, use ACL for data analytics and do this audit appropriately, or I will find someone that does. Like there are trainings that we can do.
Mhm.
And I think one area too, auditors worry about is not knowing about the business, but that is a learning process, right? When we're going into an area to audit that business, we're learning about it as we go. This to me is more our skills as an auditor and what can you learn and not learn. So, I mean, we're constantly learning on the job, that's for sure.
If you don't like to keep learning, this probably isn't the path.
That's true. That is very.
Every day we learn.
Well, the fourth principle is exercise due professional care. And this is one that wasn't it existed in the standards, but not in the code of ethics before. And this is that we literally apply due professional care in planning and performing our internal audit services. So it's almost, we said it goes right along with everything else, right? Integrity, objectivity, competency, but it's almost they're making sure we're doing it along the way in our job. Any thought on why this was added into the code or the principles?
Yep. So some of those components, it's easy to try to dive into stuff without adequate planning. And so again, everybody does some version of planning. Everybody does planning a little differently. And if you ask someone to plan an audit, if you ask 10 different competent professionals, you'd get 10 different versions of how much planning needs to be done. So I think this is reminding us that planning phase is critical. Doing your work with the highest level of standards and understanding you're kind of reflecting on the entire profession and the work that you do. Also, continuous improvement. I don't know if they have that under this one or one of the ones we just talked about, but it's important to continue to do things better and better each time, to ask for feedback from the auditees. If you just wrote them a really bad audit report, they're just going to be unhappy with you. But a lot of times the feedback you get from auditees can help you do your auditing better going forward, be less disruptive to the organization, however you want to look at it. So continuous improvement, and if we audit an area and they say we're doing this exactly the same as we did 15 years ago, we'll go, uh-oh.
Right.
Well, but for our work, same thing. Even if you're auditing the same area year after year, you've got to approach it with fresh eyes and try to do it a little better each time.
You just hit the nail on the head because one of the substandards is requirements. So making sure that we are looking at what's required. So not looking at what we did 15 years ago. And I think that is truly a huge part of it. The other piece is conformance with global internal audit standards. So making sure we have again, that's even more of the backbone of what we're doing and making sure we're following those guidelines. And then lastly is professional skepticism, which I think is interesting that they're bringing that in. But that has a lot to do with, objectivity as well, but just making sure we're constantly questioning. And like you said, maybe that goes to continuous improvement as well, a little bit as well. Just is this the right source of the information? Is this, source reliable? And just being a little more extra careful and asking more questions falls under this one.
Perfect. And one of the areas where that comes into play a lot is we're more focused now than we used to. We always should have been doing this, but lately we've had to spend a lot of time on completeness and accuracy of the information being used.
Yes.
And if a report comes out of a system, people pretty much like, it came out of the system. I didn't edit it. It's accurate. It's complete. So those, how do you know? And if the report spit out total gibberish one day, how could you tell? Getting people to think skeptically in their day-to-day use of things. But
Yes.
we also need to obviously do that on our own work, but just continuing to ask why, or if something doesn't look as expected, very rarely does the first answer really tell you what you need. And it is being skeptical in a supportive way, like we're not being hypercritical of the people that we're working with or whatever, but just more of a, "Oh, and why would that be the case?" Or, okay, but what I thought I would. So there are ways to put it where you can really have your skeptics hat on and get to good information. And if you're really adept at it, you can get them to have aha moments right then and there, even though you didn't sort of serve them up on a platter. So sometimes they're like,
Right.
yeah, that's true. That one day the report totally failed. I'm like, okay, so the system isn't completely like, or if you
Foolproof,
compared this one to
foolproof.
that,
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
totally.
I love that. I love the aha moments. Sometimes as auditors, you get that. Well, I get the report from XYZ person. Well, why? What? How do they do it? Well, I don't know. I just get the report from that person.
Uh-huh.
So it takes that extra digging and figuring it out. And sometimes they're really appreciative at the end of the day, and they're like, "Thanks for like figuring out why I get this report, or how what's its ultimate source is." So it's always nice when you get that thank you for figuring this out for me, because I've been doing it for 10 years, right?
And every once in a while they'll say, I've always wondered.
That's right.
I get it from so and so in that department, but I've never really trusted. I'm like, well, let's look at it. This is a perfect time to dig in.
Absolutely. I love that. So the last principle is maintain confidentiality. And I actually have a story about this one. Its simple definition is auditors use and protect information appropriately. So it's about the use of information, the protection of information, and that's it. And I had an auditor on my staff that had a general ledger report emailed to her Gmail account.
Uh-huh.
And it was this, automatically got flagged, which is great controls at our company, that it got flagged that it was going to a personal account, and it got stopped. But I had to have this conversation, and it was back when, we didn't have laptops early on. And when we wanted to work from home, she thought she was just emailing a report home to, pick her sample or whatever the reason was. But we had to have a serious conversation. This is the company's proprietary information. We can't be dumping it out of the system and emailing it to ourselves. And so that was my story on that one. Again, a difficult conversation, but we think we're inherently gonna, we work at the company, we're going to keep things confidential. But in our world today, a lot of us are working from home, and our neighbors are walking through our houses. And so I think it's like we need to be extra careful with confidentiality nowadays. So I'm glad this one is there right now.
And different parts of the organization have different levels of sensitive information.
Yes.
We end up accessing the juiciest of the juicy, right, for one thing or another. And so again, our standards for how closely we keep things like that are super high.
Yeah.
You don't want to, you're doing the payroll audit, you see salaries, your buddy works in accounting, all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, he is dramatically underpaid compared to his peers. You can't call him. You
I
can't tell him, like, you cannot take the information and use it in any way. If you didn't have this job, you wouldn't know the information, so you can't share it. Dinner table gets difficult because if you share a little tidbit, people don't have context around it. So even at home, your
Yeah.
roommate, people walking through, like when you're on a call, I pretty much always do headphones if I'm working at home and I'm on a call, because you just don't know.
Right. Yeah, being careful traveling in airports. I mean, all these things I think are great reminders for any professional out there. And speaking of reminders for professionals, one last question that I've been asking all of the fantastic professionals that have come and done this interview is, do you have any overall tips or advice for students? It can be related to this, it can be not personal, professional. I just think it's great for them to get your bits of wisdom directly from you.
I would say be curious. I think the best auditors are curious. Don't hesitate to ask a question. That's the way we learn. And especially early in your career, people do not expect you to know everything that you need to know. It doesn't matter how good the school was, how excellent your professor was, which I know is the case.
Oh,
All of that is great. Foundation, you're going to need to ask questions when you get out there. And so never hesitate. Ask questions internally of your mentor, of your peers, of your managers. And also when you're in an audit situation, just keep asking questions. I really think that curiosity is the most beneficial attribute for auditors.
yes, I love it. So no more curiosity kills the cat. We
Yep,
are Curious George, and we are going to act like it, right?
100%.
I don't even know if any of these students will know who Curious George is. So maybe I'll have to do a subset. I'll put a YouTube cartoon in there or something.
So there you go.
Yeah. Well, Sandy, thank you so much for being with us. It was great to have you, and thank you for sharing your perspective and wisdom on the code of ethics. So
It's my pleasure. Yep. Thanks for having me.
thank you.